Well, listen. I'm actually getting notes on the show now from my family.
No.
The good news is that each one of my family members is listening to the show. The bad news is now Alex, who walks to and from high school, will walk in the door, come up to my studio, sit down and say, okay, I've got some notes on today's show. And
oh my gosh, you're raising a Hollywood producer.
Yes, very matter of factly, and very seriously. I like this topic. You guys stayed a little too long on that topic. Evidently, his two main contentions is that I need to stammer less, and I need to let you talk more. So less me, more you.
I like how carefully you said the word stammer to make sure that you didn't stammer while you said stammer. I need to stammer less.
I need to think about those words as they're coming out of my mouth. And my wife was very flummoxed to the point of being annoyed. A couple of weeks ago, I started talking about your wife's show One Day at a Time, and I shared a plot point that was a spoiler, and I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, and so I went back and edited that, and I put a siren sound effect over it again, and then when it comes back, it's like you and Dylan saying, "Wait, spoilers! You can't say that, spoilers." And she's like, "I don't think anybody understood what that siren was all about." And I just looked at her. She says, "That was completely confusing. Nobody knows what's going on."
This is amazing. I love that this is happening in your house.
And very seriously, I'm like, well, I had said a spoiler. Didn't you hear them say at the end of that, that don't say that because it's a spoiler and everything? She says, I don't know. I was already confused by then.
Are they doing the standard criticism technique where they give you 2 compliments and then they go into the one critique?
2 compliments? No, I am not getting the 2 compliments. They're skipping right to step 3.
Back in the day when I used to work at Mattel, they made all the marketing people go to a criticism class because all the artistic people, all the people on my side of the building were like, my feelings are hurt. I don't like being criticized. So they sent all the marketing people to criticism class, and literally everybody came back, and from then on, every meeting would be like, I like the doll's playability. I like the way the car turns into a robot. Now, here are my 48 criticisms. But it always started with 2 compliments. But they were so transparent because it was clear that they had all gone to a class that said, lead with 2 compliments and then go into your criticisms.
Oh, God. I would be tempted to go the total Midwest route where you give somebody a compliment, but it's not a compliment. Like, I like how your face is really starting to clear up. I like or the Southern grandma where the insult is just God bless your soul. Yes.
Well, God bless that boy. He's a special one right there.
He's as ugly as a mud fence. God bless him.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the 28-year-old's eating paint. They're like, oh, God bless him. He's doing a good job there. Eating paint. Boy, is that a reference? What? Who eats paint anymore?
He's the only kid whose breath is chartreuse.
Oh, Brad Guigar, everybody. Well, let me ask you: Did your wife and kids listen to the most recent ProTips podcast?
Yes, and they in fact, I played it both for my older son. I haven't played it for my younger son yet, but I played it for my older son and my wife, and they were both laughing so hard they had tears coming down their face.
I rarely laugh at when I listen back to the podcast. I rarely laugh at our own jokes. I was literally crying in the car, laughing so hard as I was listening to it. And if you're a Patreon backer and you haven't gone and listened to the most recent ProTips episode, they're for people at the $5 up and level. We normally go about 10 or 15 minutes just sharing pro tips. This one took us 25 minutes because we had 2 joke runners about Charles Schultz and about Brad's wiggly line that were amazing. And if you haven't gone to listen to it, my God, the last 10 minutes are among the funniest podcast recording we've ever done. So go listen.
Yeah, we got a case of the giggles by the end, and we almost didn't finish the podcast. We almost just hit the stop button and walked away.
I know. I almost didn't even do my pro tip about replacing pen nib tips, and oh my God, I'm so glad it did because it made for the funniest Brad Guigar background line. Brad, when you go back and listen to it, even when you try to gain control of your laugh, you hear yourself far, far back in the distance going. You sound like Muttley from that old Hanna-Barbera cartoon. It's amazing. You're trying so hard to stifle the laugh.
I was trying so hard to be a professional. For once in my life, I wanted to be a professional podcaster, and there was just no way I was going to be able to do it. Because I don't want to give away the farm, but oh my God, it was super funny because you're saying all this stuff completely innocent, and I just started roaring.
Well, and once I saw what a sexual angle you had taken it from, it was it's all the phrases that I was using was anyway. I don't want to ruin it for people. Just go listen.
Yes.
But speaking of ruining delightful jokes, Brad and I had a fantastic idea that we want to share with you guys. So in the interest of getting up the algorithms on iTunes, here is our proposal. If we can get 100 of you to go over to iTunes right now and give us a 5-star rating, because you want to give it a 5-star rating, we are going to do a drunk ComicLab. And what we're going to do is on a Friday night, the kids are in bed, everybody's safe. We're gonna crack open a little Pinot Noir on my case, and Brad's case a little whiskey.
You are a Pinot Noir man? I didn't know that about you.
Bradley, you know what? I'm a man of fine taste.
Well, I will have a aged bottle of Laphroiag ready and primed for that occasion.
Ooh, Laphroiag is very good. Ooh, that's a nice. I like a little smoky Laphroiag. That's good.
It is my favorite.
But you know what? Pinot Noir. You can't live in California and not be a Pinot Noir drinker. It's like $1 a jug here. It's so
they've got it coming in through the taps.
It's just like $40 in the rest of the country. In California, you're brushing your teeth with it.
So we're gonna do Drunk ComicLab. If we can get to 100 ratings, Drunk ComicLab, and it's just gonna be Dave and I. There's not gonna be anything useful that happens during this podcast at all. We're just gonna start telling all of the stories. Like there's so many stories that I can say, Dave, tell the story about XYZ. And because I've heard the story a number of times through doing conventions and so forth, and we'll just take it from there.
Oh my God, that will be so delightful because there's nothing more delightful than a drunk Brad Guigar. Having seen it at 10, 20 years worth of comics conventions, it's delightful. You're going to want to get to that. So Brad, I don't know how to tell people how to do it. How do you actually do a rating on iTunes? I'm legit idiot about that. I don't know how to do that.
It's real easy. If you're listening to the show on your iPhone, there's another stammer now that I'm going to have to edit out so in post, so my son doesn't give me the look. Just just click on ComicLab, scroll down, and you'll see something that says ratings and reviews, and tap to rate. And you can give us a little rating. It'll walk you through the process. It's super easy. And once you've rated us, like I said, I think we're at 27. So we've given you guys a real head start. We're a third of the way there already. Well, not quite a third, but we're close. It should be very easy.
We're 50% there. Using Brad Guigar math.
I like to round up. We're closer to a quarter. Okay, maybe we'll say that. We're over a quarter of the way there, and we can jump up to 100 easy.
And trust me, Brad Guigar drunk is what you want in your life. That will be delightful. So, all right, Bradley, I have a topic for this week, but first, let's warm up the show and let everybody know that they are listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Guigar, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his soon-to-be drunk friend, Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab.
So we will say that twice, patreon.com/ComicLab. Because I want people to listen to that ProTips episode. It's so funny.
Speaking of fractions, Mr. Dave Kellett is already well past the halfway mark with 22 days to go, I just checked out, of his new Pug book, which is kickstarted at newpugbook.com. I just wanted to say congratulations on knocking it out of the park. Being at 50% this early is fantastic.
It's nice. It's actually, I think I just checked it. It's at 68% right now, so that's good.
Last show you said you didn't know math. Now you've got me down to the decimal.
Well, when you start saying that 27 is halfway to 100, I have to be careful. I have to start paying attention to the math if you're going to be doing stuff like that. So, it's very nice. As you know, with any Kickstarter, you are on tenterhooks until you make it. I'm just anxious until I get there. And then after that, I'm like, what was I so nervous about? But every time I do it, I get nervous until I cross that finish line. So we'll see.
Let me ask you this, real quick. Can you give us a hint as to what that first stretch goal is? Give us a little taste.
A little taste? Yes, I want to add, and you will like this word, I want to add French flaps onto the cover.
French flaps. Wonderful.
French flaps. Yeah, that's a very special move. You have to stretch your knees a lot in order to get...
Especially at our age. What's wrong with him, Doctor? Oh, he's got a case of the French flaps.
Oh, boy, poor guy. He's got the old French flaps. Oh, there's no coming back from that, Doc. That's where they take you out back like an old horse and just put a shotgun up to your head. Well, Black Beauty ran his last race. He's got the French flaps. Time to put down Black Beauty.
Oh, God. It sounds like an injury that a mime would get.
Oh, French flaps.
Oh, he's got French flaps. I don't know why that's kidding me, but it is.
French, because it's a funny phrase, French flaps. Why do the French get credit for so many things? They get French fries, French toast, French flaps. Do you think it's just because it's monosyllabic? People. Like you never hear German flaps, German fries, German toast.
Well, no, I think there actually are German fries, but in general, not so much. There's not. And Swedish after meatballs, the list goes down precipitously.
Yeah, I honest to God, I think it's because it's a monosyllabic national word. It lends itself to naming. Like no one's going to go, oh, Zimbabwean toast. You're not going to go with a 4-syllable, 5-syllable word.
No, Australian is there's not going to be a lot of monikers there.
So it really speaks to if anybody's planning on setting up a nation, monosyllabic is the way to go.
Absolutely. If you want to be known as innovators.
Speaking of that though, and this actually does go into comics, is that if you are been paying attention in the last 25 years to how Disney's naming structure for their movies is, they have largely moved towards single words for their titles. And I think that's a very, very clever choice on their part. When you're marketing to kids, make it as simple as possible, very few words. And in this case, the fewest words. And it's interesting. It's an interesting thing to note on Disney's part.
Well, and also I noticed they did a very clever thing because they were always kind of touchy about that deal about Walt's body being preserved in ice long after he was dead. And now if you do a search for Walt Disney's Frozen, you get a completely different set of results than you did 10 years ago. You can't find information on him being in cryogenesis anymore. All you get is let it go.
That's an amazing idea. The idea that they were so tired of that. They're
like, we don't want to hear this anymore. We're just going to bury it under 15 million returns for our new movie.
Wow. Give me that woman's name that I can't pronounce to sing this. What was now
I'm forgetting. Let it go. You've got a daughter. You know what that song is called.
Yeah, no, but I was trying to remember what the man. I'm turning into such an old man. Remember at the Oscars when he totally mangled her name?
Oh yeah.
I'm forgetting his name. I'm forgetting the whole process. This is when you know you're old, is you forget the 4 steps to the thing that was going to help you remember.
Yeah. Do you remember that guy who said that thing about that woman? Remember that?
Yeah,
remember that? He was that guy? Who are you talking about, Dad? That guy, the guy with the head.
Like when I'm now bringing up a topic with my wife, I have to talk about an actor who is 4 movies away from the movie I'm trying to get to so that I can work my way back via IMDb. Like I have to go, he was in Parent Trap 2. What? Parent Trap 2? Yeah, I need to say that so that I can get to another actor. So anyway.
It's always wise to start with Kevin Bacon.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Bradley, the big topic I wanted to talk to you about this week is next weekend is Emerald, or actually by the time people are listening to the show, Emerald City Comic Con, we will have rolled around in Seattle.
Yeah. This
is a show that you and I started doing with Scott and Chris, I think in 2000, I don't even know, 2006, 2007?
It goes way back. I'm gonna say at least 2006, maybe 2007 at the latest. But we've been doing that show, and mainly, we have to say thanks to Scott kind of pulling some strings and getting us all out there. We started exhibiting together at that big table, and man, those first few years were amazing.
Yeah, it was delightful, and huge thanks to Jim DeMonakis for designing a beautiful show that really was for readers, by readers, and of readers. And artists like myself and yourself loved and still love Emerald City Comic Con. But one of the things I want to talk to you about is that in my mind, my love for that show is fading slowly. And here's the thing that I run up against every year. And I think you as a friend have probably slapped yourself on the forehead every year as I say it. Because every year I say, you know what, Brad, I think it's my last year going to Emerald City. I think this is it. I think I've finally reached my breaking point. And you are like the friend in high school. It's like, break up with her. Why do you keep doing this to yourself?
She's dated 3 other guys in the time that you've been considering breaking up with her.
You're now 2 towns away. Why do you moved? Why do you?
All of my girlfriends always came from another town when I was in high school.
Oh, Brad and his Kansas girlfriend.
You wouldn't know her. She goes to another school. I had that phrase memorized.
She travels a lot for her modeling, right, Brad? Am I right, Brad? That's the way you got to do it.
Yeah, Emerald City started out as a fantastic show, but the returns, and I have to be completely honest, for me, I noticed returns for comic conventions in general becoming less and less and less, and until it got to the point that, frankly, Dave, I'm waiting for you to get to this point with all conventions, not only Emerald City, but the whole shooting match. I don't, unless you go there and make a great profit, which I think there's a couple you probably pull that off at. The rest of us, man, I don't see the point.
Well, San Diego is still that one for me because and the honest to God truth is I don't have the cost that 90% of other cartoonists have when I go to San Diego.
Yeah.
Other people have to book a $200 to $400 flight to get to San Diego. I get in my van, no big deal. Other people have to spend, I don't know, $500 to $1,000 on hotels. What did you normally spend at San Diego?
Oh God, it was a couple hundred a night, and because I was so persnickety about staying with people, I very rarely had a roommate, so I just took it on the chin.
Right. So for me, that's free because I have family down in San Diego, and then most people their food budget is a couple $100, but for me, digging out of trashes is fine. So I'm great there. I've learned really to dumpster dive.
I've seen you make a lunch out of toenails and eraser shavings.
It's good. It's good living if you could do it. So anyway, no. But the point being that San Diego will probably always be on my schedule because the costs are so minimal for me, and I still get a lot of enjoyment because I grew up in San Diego. So when I go to the show, this is the only show this happens at. Literally, high school friends are coming up to me going, "Oh God, Dave, how fun to see you here!" And that's fun,
nice. Yeah.
So it's like childhood friends, family friends. My whole young life network is down there. So anyway, so San Diego will always be on my radar. But Emerald City right now, I think my flight up there to Emerald City, a couple $100, let's say 200. I think it was around. My hotel for the weekend, $800, I believe. Booth was about $1,100, I believe, although I'm going to splitsy it with our dear friend Jake Parker, who was on the podcast a couple weeks ago, which actually I'm looking forward to. I've never exhibited with Jake, and I bet he's delightful.
Yeah, that'll be great.
So that'll be fun. Food budget, a couple $100. And anyway, I have a great location on the Sky Bridge. So unlike most Comic Cons where you feel like you've been in the back part of an airplane for 4 days, you know what I mean by that? With the artificial,
that's a great description.
It's like the artificial light, the artificial air, the feeling of cement and plastic all around you, and a cacophonous noise that you can't shake. That's mostly what a Comic-Con is. But at Emerald City, I am in the Sky Bridge, which is surrounded by beautiful cascade of light because it's all windows. The air quality is great. The noise is not so cacophonous. And yet, every year, I find myself going, this is my last year, I think. This might be my last year. Yeah. So I want you to fix me, Brad. Why am I saying this, and why do I keep going, and why do I continue to say it even after I go?
Oh, well, listen, I don't want to talk about you specifically, but I will tell you in general what I think the thoughts are on that. And that is we have all, or when it comes to comic conventions, have gotten into a gambler's mentality. where we go to one show and it just stinks, and then you think, oh, but the next show is going to be better. And then you literally get into that mentality that keeps you pulling the lever on a slot machine because the next one's going to hit big. And then what happens is you do maybe make a little bit of an advance at the next show, or you talk yourself into believing that this show was somehow better than the last show for reasons that you can't put your finger on, like money. Right. But you're like, oh, but I think I did a lot more promotion, or I felt good about this one, or, I met this certain person that I might not have met otherwise, which is justifiable to an extent. But I think we have all gotten into a gambler's mentality when it comes to comic conventions, and we keep thinking that the next show is going to be the jackpot.
Yeah. So that's okay. So the summary of the gambler's mentality is the next one is going to hit. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Huh. That's interesting.
And that could be the next show, like your next show that you schedule, or you could look at that in terms of last Emerald City wasn't great, but this Emerald City is going to be great. And if this one isn't great, next year's Emerald City is going to be fantastic.
Right. So, or here's where I think I am, rather than a gambler's mentality, the next one's going to be great, which I think I'm experiencing the reverse psychology, which was the one 4 shows ago was great, and I'm still riding that feeling.
You're chasing the dragon.
Yeah, chasing the dragon. Exactly. Yeah, so for me, there was, 6 years of really fun, profitable, laugh-filled, beer-filled Emerald City Comic Cons that were just delightful. And then things changed, and I'm still angling for the Comic-Con the Emerald City Comic-Con that I had 7 years ago,
Yeah. Nope. I think that's absolutely accurate. In fact, I guarantee that's what's going on.
Okay, well, so then I know this is going to be a show about Brad fixing Dave. So how do I, at this show, what are the hallmarks that I use to tell me whether to do the show again next year? Like, what do I look for, Brad?
You're talking to the wrong guy.
No, I'm talking to the right guy, because you made clear decisions of not doing Comic-Cons anymore.
I'll tell you exactly how I did it.
Okay.
But it's so unpopular. It gets such a pushback every time I say it.
Okay.
Profit. How much profit did you make? And was it worth the amount of time that you spent to make that profit? That's the beginning and the end for me. It was I was looking at the time I was spending preparing for a convention, the time I spent at the convention, and frankly, to be honest with you, the time I spent recovering from that. And it became very, very clear that I was spending way too much time making way too little money. And I don't buy into the whole I did good promotion, because my opinion is if it isn't clickable, it's not promotion.
Right.
Those freaking flyers that we all hand out are very nice. And if you're going to be at a convention, you definitely should hand out flyers, especially ones with little maps back to your table. Fantastic. But don't kid yourself into that being the equivalent of even taking out a simple advertisement on a website that's well targeted and well placed and well written. That is a much better expenditure of your promotion dollar than convention flyers. And networking, I don't know. I've never been really super sold on that. Although the first thing I've got to put out as a caveat is I would have never met you if it wouldn't have been for conventions. I would have never met Scott and Chris and a whole host of other people who I'm very thankful that I've gotten a chance to meet without comic conventions. But networking, I mean, those have been good friendships, and we've done business things together. But I think sometimes when a web cartoonist says they're going to go to a show for networking, they think they're going to land like a big project or a big job. And I don't think that happens with enough frequency. And also, you don't need to spend money on a $1,000 table. You can spend a fraction of the amount and get a ticket and walk the show floor and do the equal amount of networking.
That's okay. No, that latter point is very true. Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, I've done that a few times and had a blast. It was fantastic. And when you're like that, you have way more time to actually focus on networking, and you can put more effort into it. It's more valuable time that you're spending when you're not worried about being behind your table.
Right.
But when it comes to these, I really have become a little bit fierce in that I strictly looked at and bottom lined it financially and said, I can't keep doing that.
Financially, this will be a very clear year whether or not it can work. Last year, I hadn't had a new book, I think, in like 3 years because of various factors, and so now that I'm starting to produce books again, that's going to be a kicker as to whether or not Emerald City is worth it for me anymore. And I'll know probably by Friday afternoon if the sales are going to be what I need them to be.
You can usually tell very early.
My heart is telling me that you may be right in the sense that one of the things that I do is I can put up an eBay drawing once a week, right, separate from the original art that people can buy on Sheldon. And if I spent the weekend just cranking out eBay drawings for the next 20 weeks, equivalent to the amount of time that I would have spent in Seattle, the profit margin might be the same. But then, of course, the question becomes, well, you say you're going to do those 20 drawings, but when you don't go to a convention, are you going to do those 20 drawings? You know, that's the sort of the quid pro quo in giving up a convention. You actually have to do the convention's amount of work.
Yes, perhaps, but again, there's only so much that you've got to overcome. How much profit do you figure you make on one of those eBay drawings? Is that a fair question to ask?
If you consider the sunk time, I can do a pretty good one. I can do a pretty good one, like 45 minutes to an hour, right? As you could do a pretty good drawing. So I think that ends up being an hourly rate. Let's say if it's an hour, it's an hourly rate of about $100 to $200 an hour.
So how many of those would you have to do to make the similar sort of profit that you get at the end of an Emerald City Con after you take care of all your expenses?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's about a weekend's worth of drawing, and it's not that bad. And frankly, it's more pleasant because you can sit there and watching, Thor Ragnarok while you're drawing. So.
Well, yeah, and you're not getting fondled by the TSA. You're not.
Well, no, that's a bonus. That's a feature. That's not a bug.
Any kind of touch.
I just need human touch, Brad.
I just need someone to know that
I just want a hug. Anyway, so there's a sort of fallacy that if I stay home, I can make the same amount of money, because you don't actually do it. If you. One of the things. Okay, so here's the flip side of me going to conventions. What a convention does do for me, and this is very true. It helps me set my publishing schedule for the year, in the sense that I say, I've got to have the book back from the printers a month before Comic-Con. And in doing that, I then have a new book to sell for Christmas season and for the rest of the year. And then because I'm going to a convention, I will very often make a new pin or a new magnet or a new button that I wouldn't otherwise have spent the time to do. And then that goes up in the store. But again, it is a question of, am I spinning my wheels to create something for a show that didn't end up making me a bunch of profit, so this is the constant battle that I'm wrestling, a constant stone that I'm pushing up a hill. I don't know. Is the short version. I'm increasingly leaning towards maybe Emerald City is no longer the one for me from a logical standpoint, which is different than an emotional decision. I think logic would tell me that it's not worth it.
And frankly, I think there are fewer and fewer shows that are worth it by and large. I mean, for people like us, there was always the Emerald City. On the East Coast, there was Baltimore. People had always said great things about Heroes Con.
TCAF if you're in Canada.
Absolutely. TCAF has got to be mentioned there. Shows that were still about comics and did a very good track record of bringing in comics fans. And I'm not saying that to trash like the Wizard shows or the big Reed pop shows where it's about a more of a wider pop culture thing. I think those shows are great. They're just not big money makers for me. And so I've got to buy a ticket, not a table for those shows. But there was always, those solid comics shows like Emerald City and Baltimore and stuff. And I just think we're quickly getting to the point that even those shows aren't returning enough that makes it worth people like us showing up and sitting at a table for a weekend.
Yeah. I go back to the fact that San Diego Comic-Con used to be stocked with people that loved comics, as was true with Emerald City Comic-Con. And now it's stocked with people that came to see the third bit actor on Flash that only appeared on one episode towards the end, but by God, that's exciting to them. You know what I mean?
And walks up to your table assuming that everything on your table is free.
Right. So now let me ask you a question, because I want to turn this away from us specifically and towards a broader cartooning audience. If you were talking to Brad Guigar, 25-year-old right now, just got out of college, starting up his cartooning career, what would you advise him or her to do regarding Comic-Cons? How would you tell a 20-year-old to approach a Comic-Con?
You want me to be very honest on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
The best way for me to do that is to say this. 10 years ago, when we wrote the How to Make Webcomics book, I wrote the chapter on conventions. The illustration was me standing on top of a table dressed like a carnival barker, and it was a very long chapter. And when I wrote the Webcomics Handbook, which was the follow-up to that a few years later, I referenced that and I said, I've got kind of a different view on these. I'm pulling back from that a little bit. Here's some information about attending comic conventions, but I want you to weigh your options very, very seriously. Right now, I'm working on assembling the content for the second edition of the Webcomics Handbook. And right now, I'm really, quite literally, without any hyperbole, my plan is for the chapter on comic conventions to be a one-page chapter that says, don't do it. It says, if you want information on this, get the first edition, but I'm not wasting any ink on this. All of the ink that I would be devoting to this, we're going to devote to crowdfunding. And those things are returning on your investment. And I just don't know that comic conventions are. We keep showing up. We keep stocking Artist Alley with our bodies. And we keep walking away in the hole. And particularly, honestly, what I would tell 25-year-old Brad Guigar is don't reach for your credit card when it comes time to pay for this convention, thinking that you're going to get it back. Make those decisions very, very carefully, because I did a couple conventions on credit cards and then spent an awful long time paying that off. Those are not smart decisions that you're making. So I would say very seriously, you should not be going to a show unless you really have a clear-cut path to turning a profit. And if you're telling yourself that it's all about promotion and networking, I would tell 25-year-old Brad Guigar that he's kidding himself.
So my big takeaway as I listen to you there is, let's stop all human contact. Let's not engage with any other humans physically in any way. No handshakes, no smiles. I just want to look at them through a screen. Is that what?
No con crud, no getting sneezed on. Absolutely, yes. Listen, I am very happy as a hermit.
But there is an argument to be made, though, that you don't, between Patreon and Kickstarter and other side books that you might be selling in online stores and Etsy and original art sales and eBay, that you could replace almost completely any advantage to convention sales, I would think.
Mm-hmm. I really feel strongly about this. And in terms of the human contact that you mentioned, like I said before, buy a ticket, not a table, and then contact your butt off within limits of proper behavior.
Well, now let me counter with one other point, because I my heart still vacillates on this. I still get emails though that are like this, and I wanted to set it up for you, and you could knock it down. I actually encourage you to knock it down. Hey Dave, I first met you in San Diego Comic-Con 2005, and you were so nice, and you gave a great sketch to my son. And ever since then, we have been lifelong fans, and we bought every book you've done, and I have 3 of your originals up on my wall in my office. Thanks again for what you do. Signed, Susan. In my over the arc of my career, there have been a lot of those kind of moments where a 5-minute interaction has led to a lifelong fandom, or at least contributed to it. So now give me the counter argument for that as to why Comic-Cons are not advantageous in that scenario.
I don't have one.
Okay.
That I can't counter. But my experience has been polar opposite from yours. I don't have those emails in my inbox, particularly not to the volume that you're talking about. But my Patreon backers send me that equivalent kind of note where they say, Oh man, I haven't really followed you a whole lot until you started putting stuff up on Patreon. Those are the people that send me the incredible thoughtful notes, the things that show that they're really paying attention to the nuance that's in the strip over the years, and the people that are first in line every time I put something else out.
Right.
So for me, I haven't personally had that kind of experience with conventions, but Patreon has definitely brought those people out for me.
I can't disagree with you regarding Patreon in terms of how that has changed my career and my relationship with my readers. Patreon and Kickstarter as a 1-2 punch have been an amazing change from how we used to do comics back when we were all doing comics conventions. Maybe this is just the last gasp of the last dinosaur still going to Comic Cons and still thinking, like you said, that there's a gambler's mentality that this one's going to hit. I am very willing to admit that that's the case with Emerald City Comic Con. It's also the case that Emerald City Comic Con has been taken over corporately by Reed Pop, whereas it used to be run by Jim DeMonakis and his gang. And there is just a creeping but noticeable change in the show in terms of mood and tone and presentation and style and feeling. And that has altered my feelings for what is otherwise a lovely city filled with energetic people who love comics.
Well, now tell me this. Are they still doing that thing that the Reed shows did back in the day where if you buy a table, you just get the space on the floor? You've got to bring your own table and your own chairs?
God, no. I did 1 or 2 Reed shows that were like that, where it's like you get the space and you get to fill the space with everything that you have. And,
well, you're going to have to come over here and buy it from the convention. And I remember doing this at a show in Chicago. It was literally more cost effective for me to get a taxi, go out to Lowe's, buy a folding table and a folding chair, grab a taxi back. This was pre-Uber. And by the time I did all of that, it was still less than I would have paid to rent a table and chairs at the convention center.
Yeah. No, I know. I know a lot of people that do Reed Pop shows where they go to a Costco and they buy 2 folding tables and then just leave them at the show or give them to some group afterward.
Yeah.
Whatever the last fan is to the booth. Hey, you want a table? That kind of thing. Because it's just cheaper than renting it from Reed Pop. But yeah, no, I think on this one, I think in all likelihood, Jim schooled them on look, these are artists, not businesses. They are traveling at their own expense, not on a corporate expense, and they need a table and a chair and some basic amenities, like San Diego Comic-Con does. Yeah, I've just noticed that the contracts are getting longer, the fees are trickling up, and the clauses are getting more intricate. And anyway, the side promotional stuff that gets you absolutely nothing is getting more and more of a push. Get your name on 10,000 bags, get your name on 10,000 lanyards, get your name on some sign by a bathroom in the hallway, that kind of thing.
Although I don't know whether I could participate since I'm not going, but I always meant to do an illustration for that book that they put out every year. It's really well printed, that hardcover book.
Oh, the Monsters book that they do, yeah.
Yeah. And every year it gets to be March, and then I see Emerald City, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot to do that again.
Well, I would. Here's what I would like to do. I want to report back to you in 2 or 3 weeks when I'm back from Emerald City Comic Con, and I've had a chance to crunch my numbers, and we'll talk over cost and profit, and we'll see. We'll talk about what I benefited from it, people I met. Last year, I got to meet and chat with Kelly Sue DeConnick. That was a fun one. I've never met her before, and I'm really taken by her work. And then there was a few people that I then went on to approach or hire for Tales of the Drive, which are the short stories that I do for Drive. So there were benefits there, and we've talked before about that there's a side benefit to networking. But it would be fun to talk brass tacks and numbers and see whether the show, in your mind, is still worth doing. Because I bet the answer is no.
And here's the other thing we're going to do. Speaking of San Diego Comic Convention and Tables and Chairs, when we do that drunk podcast, story number 1 is how we got our table at San Diego.
Story number 2 on that drunk podcast is how I learned how to say goodbye to people that won't go away, and it's the Brad Guigar method. And that story drunk is going to be much more fun than sober, so I'm going to save that one.
Do you know I have demonstrated that in my entrepreneurship class at Hushin School of Art? Each semester I've taught it, and it is the funniest thing in the world to see people's reaction to that when I finally get to that one step.
It's delightful. So, on that note of intervening on Dave's life and saving me, one thing that you said on a previous podcast, and I took this with great interest because I'm realizing I may be doing it wrong. And so here's the intervention that I want to propose to you for me is, am I presenting my long form story drive incorrectly? Am I doing it wrong online?
Well, listen, I wouldn't say wrong. I think you're trying your best. I'm teasing. I'm kidding.
Suddenly you've become that Southern grandma. Oh, God bless him. Look at him. He's doing his best over there. Dave Kellett, he's eating some paint.
I've been holding back, waiting. Here's the deal. Doing long form, I think there's a lot of things that have changed over the years. And I think that the time has never been better than right now for long form comics creators. The thing that makes me crazy is when I see people continuing to present their long form comic in the same way that we've been doing webcomics since time immemorial, where you've got a site and you come to the site and you see the most recent update and then you can go backwards through the archives. That's not great for long form comics, particularly because then this is very important to understand this next part. The way most people write a long form comic, what happens is you just get thrown into like page 13 and you've got no reference to what these characters are, and it just ends when the artist and the writer get to the end of the page. That's no way to capture your first-time reader that's coming to your site.
Wait, can you elucidate on that last point? What do you mean it just ends when the writer and the artist get to the end of the page? What is it?
This will become very clear because I'm going to say the way you are writing Drive is a saving grace in that I think you kind of still do the old school publishing approach. However, I can tell when I read Drive that when you write each one of your updates, you write them, and I'm correct in assuming that you're pretty much posting like a half a page from your graphic novel on your updates.
No, each one is a full page.
Or a full page. Okay. But when you get to the end of that page, it's almost like from years of doing a comic strip, you are training yourself. And when you get to that last panel at the bottom of the page, there's a little lift there. If there's not a punchline, there's a lift or there's an important plot point. Am I correct in assuming that you're planning that?
Well, yeah. And the one thing that we had always talked about, so I was less worried about how the pages end, because the one thing we'd always talked about, and it stuck with me, is how when you're writing long form and you're updating page by page, you want to make each page a satisfying ending, or at least a satisfying feeling at the end of that. There's an explosion, there's a joke, there's a major advance in the plot, there's a major character reveal, there's something very satisfying by the end of that page, right? Is that what you're getting at? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I do shoot for that for every update of Drive.
So here's the problem. Most people aren't doing that. And so that's why I kind of repeatedly, especially on webcomics.com, talk about somebody who's publishing as if it's still 2005. Now, if you really would want to adjust what you're doing, I would love to see what would happen if you took Drive and instead of having the most recent page there on the main site, have a landing page.
So this was the kicker that made me realize, okay, Brad might be onto something here. I present the most recent page on the main page when you land on Drive, and you're saying, don't cater for the current reader. Cater to the new reader. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Well, you can. I think you can cater to both of them if you play it well. I would want drivecomic.com to become a landing page, and I would want you to have multiple entry points to what you're doing there. In other words, you're going to have a strong visual image, maybe a little blurb that introduces the first-time reader to what's going on. Then you're going to have a link that says start from the very beginning with a little icon or a little, screen grab, a cropped panel, for example. Start from the beginning. Then you're going to have entry points for each one of your chapters. And then you're going to have a little cropped panel image for most recent update. Those are the big ones. But you could have any other good entry points to the story. And each one of them needs to have a little header and a image that's like a cropped panel or something to give it some visual interest. That's what you're presenting on your landing page. So you've got an introduction for the newcomers, and then maybe 5 or 6 different ways that somebody can enter that story. I have no doubt in my mind a WordPress person could help you set this up. When you go and you click on that most recent update link, that takes you to another page, what I would call a secondary landing page. And that's a page where your most recent update always resides. And that
like a slash newest page kind of thing. Is that
exactly. And then it becomes your standard webcomic approach. You've got the most recent update. You can click back for previous. You can click forward for next. As you're going back through the archives, you still have those other links there so that people can jump to different entry points. Like somebody might come to the most recent update, go back to in the archive, think, yep, I'm going to read this, and then boom, click on chapter 1. So you need those entry points still, but that secondary landing point, importantly enough, is something that your repeat readers can bookmark. And instead of coming back through that landing page every day, they bookmark the secondary landing page, and then they can just come back there every time they want to. And between that and RSS and your social media, you can direct traffic very, very easily.
Yeah.
Right? And between those things there and the other thing, as important as those entry point icons are, you need maybe on the right-hand side a list of ways they can buy the books, because between books and ebooks, you want to be pushing those methods of people reading the story as strongly as you're pushing a web reading experience on your website.
Right. I mean, the reason why I'm asking you all this is that I think the Drive site is probably pushing 9 years old at this point. It's pretty old. Mm-hmm. And so it's time for me to start thinking about these updates. And I am taken by the idea of a landing page that is the first comic. I will be honest with you that when sites like Penny Arcade and PvP made their new landing page almost like a magazine index page, with like, here's 5 articles that you're going to see in this magazine. It was interesting to me that at that point with both of those websites is when I stopped reading them both, because I don't know what it is about me, but I would click on it and go, I don't know where the comic is. I don't want to read this. And so I stopped, not that I was a big Penny Arcade reader at any point, but like, even if I click on Penny Arcade now, I'm like, where the hell's the comic? There's 19 things on this page. I don't know where the comic is. Oh, I guess it's over here. But then I do another drop down for another comic, and then there's 15 comic presentation. So to me, and granted, this might be the old man in me talking, is that like I want to be presented with a comic when I come to a web comic. I don't want to be presented with a magazine index when I come to a website. Mm-hmm. And so like I like the idea of a landing page if it's the first comic. I don't like the idea of a landing page if it's an index of like, here's 17 directions you can go, because then you suffer from the M&M fallacy of people can't make a choice when there's too many choices, And so I like the idea, but I do like the idea of a newest one, and I very much like the idea of like chapter headings and act headings, which I don't currently have. Mm-hmm. I think those are critical for people that are like, hey, I stopped reading when I got deployed 6 months ago, and now I want to start back up again, but God knows how to get back to that point in the archive. So that's actually a tricky point that I want to talk to you about is what's the best long form navigation you've seen for someone who can quickly and easily find a spot that they were 3 months ago, 6 months ago, or I don't know when I stopped reading, but it was somewhere around this point in the story. What's the best version of that you have seen for long form?
Here's the deal. You've got a tool that will do that if you're using Comic Easel or Comic Press, and it's the bookmark tool. The bad thing about that is that the way it's designed and the way it's implemented is not user-friendly.
Do you have to be logged in to do it or something?
I think it sets a cookie. I don't think you have to log in. I think it sets a cookie if I remember right. But there is a way you can bookmark where you are in the archive. Problem is it's so small and inconsequential that I don't think a lot of users use it. It needs to be designed a little bit better. And explained a little bit better. But there actually is a tool to help people do exactly that. Like one thing that I'm currently doing is I've decided to put a large amount of money into redeveloping my website. And to do that, I brought in a WordPress developer, not necessarily a designer, but just somebody that I could say, okay, here's what I want this site to do. And those are the types of things that they can help with that a lot of times we're not finding in the out-of-the-box comic easel and comic press.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and part of this is me starting the discussion with you about, because I think it would be helpful to bring people on this journey, is that just like I've been talking about me moving house and selling, getting this house ready to sell, I'm at the very beginning process, and it might be a 6 or 12 month process, very beginning process of redesigning an older website. And my first stage whenever I do that is like, who's doing it great right now? What are they doing? Like the fact finding of who's making it work for them, and what bits of code do they have working for them? What bits of design do they have working for them? And so that's where I am right now, and asking you, what am I doing wrong? Because it's good to have, especially a trusted friend, say, here's the 6 things that I think you're doing wrong. Because it's good to be challenged on your basic assumptions of what your site is and isn't doing.
Yeah, and here's one thing I will give her a little shout out because she colorizes all of my stuff, and I'm her biggest fan. But check out Alex Heberling's site for somebody that I think does it really, really well. And that's the Hughes, TheHues Alex Heberling, spelled exactly the way it sounds, .com. She's got that landing page approach done very, very close to how I would do it myself if I was in charge. And she's knocking it out of the park as far as I can see.
So, okay, this is where I get confused. I just went to her site, and it's perfectly lovely. But are you saying that this landing page is for a new reader in her case, or is this landing page?
Yep. The whole approach shifts things over to that new reader that you're trying to build a readership out of. In my opinion, that secondary landing page has to be designed in such a way, even with a note at the top, that kind of reminds people you can bookmark this page to keep up with the most recent updates. I think that thing that you're talking about is very much a design issue too, that you can point out to people how they can use that.
Well, that's
page.
The thing is that for me, if the central goal of a landing page that you're talking about is to bring in new readers, then this is where I think Penny Arcade and the PvP style and this style of magazine index gets it wrong. Because in my mind, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but you should have 2 major kind of button approaches: new reader, existing reader, and that's it. Like all that. Like if you're trying to sell people on books and Patreon and links and Kickstarters, if they're a new reader, if that's the idea of a central landing page, right? I mean, that's what you're getting at with a landing page, right? Is a new reader.
Right.
Then why would you throw 16 links at them? In the Google sense, all people want to do is search, right? So you just give them a search box.
Right.
And if people are new to the comic, all they want to do is read the first comic. So give them the first comic, right?
Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. They might want to, because here's what happens all the time for me. I'm exposed to a new comic. I don't necessarily want to go back and read the very first page of that comic. Particularly if it's been going on for a while, because the art might have changed an awful lot. The person might have been, as we all do, might have been improving, and maybe those first 2 pages aren't so great. But I will read like the most recent storyline, or I might read the most recent chapter. And that's why I want there to be as many entry points there as possible, because there might be any number of reasons that I choose to go any place other than the first page of that comic.
Yeah, there's conflicting design guides though with that, because you either choose to help the new reader and guide them into reading the comic, which is probably giving them a short blurb of the about and then the first page, or you give them every conceivable option that they could choose, in which case you lose them by going, ugh, what is this word salad? You know what I mean?
Perhaps, but listen, I'll be putting my money where my mouth is. I'll find out how well thought out this is by the end of the year. But I think if you design it well, what'll happen is that landing page is all about the new reader. That secondary landing page is all about the existing reader.
No, that I will agree with you. I think I like the idea that there's a newest page for the existing reader, and then the basic URL is for the new reader. I agree with you there.
And that secondary landing page is where people are going to bookmark.
And my gut is telling me, and this is just the first conversation we're going to have about this, my gut is telling me that the secondary landing page for existing readers, that can have the word salad of Kickstarter, Patreon, books, t-shirts, PayPal me $1, whatever it is you want to put on there.
Sure.
That can have the word salad. But I really feel like the first landing page, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, that should be super clear and probably have just a short blurb and the first page of the comic on it, right? I mean, obviously within a design setting, but keep it really simple, right?
I would go short blurb, first page of the comic, first page of each chapter.
First page. Oh, wait, that's interesting. Why would you do that?
I want to give them multiple entry points.
Now, what do you? Okay, you lost me a little bit.
No. Okay, wait a minute. Let me go back. Links to the first page of every chapter. Not
so
the
if somebody
page.
wants to say like, okay, I think I might like this story. Let's see what it looks like in 100 pages. Is that what you're thinking? Like the equivalent of flipping through a book?
I like this storyline. Let me go back to the beginning of this storyline, not necessarily the beginning of the entire comic series.
Oh, well, then you're serving a different master then, right? Like if your goal of the...
No, I'm giving those people every opportunity to jump in where they want to jump in.
Right, but then you're jumping back into the word salad of their... Like, imagine I'm totally new to Evil Inc., right? And I've never seen it before, and someone said, have you tried Brad Guigar's Evil Inc.? And I go, and I land on your landing page, and I'm presented with all these different title chapters, and the first comic, and the intro. Like, which one do you want me to choose?
I want you to choose the one that you want to choose.
I'm saying by giving them too many options, you're not guiding them towards where you want them to go.
I don't know that 4 or 5 options is too many.
Okay. I guess we're differing on that one. But yes, I see what you're saying. But to me, if the point of the specialized landing page is for new readers, I don't know what a new reader gains by jumping in at chapter 4 and as a title. You know what I mean?
Maybe it's just me. Maybe this is mirror research instead of market research. But I've found myself in that very position time and time again, where I get greeted with a new comic, and it's like, I don't want to go back to the very beginning. I just want to get a sense for what the story is, what the writing is like, what the art is like, and I'll just read, like if I'm being thrust into the middle of chapter 4, I'll go to the beginning of chapter 4 and see what it's like and judge it.
Okay, I can see that happening.
If chapter 4 is thin, maybe I'll go back to chapter 3.
This is a legit confusing discussion about how we guide a reader towards what's the best. I mean, because you can also have a cartoonist who legit hates their first 20 pages, but you got to get them to start there. Yeah. So I can see that being a problem too.
Mm-hmm. And here's another thing that we've got to have a discussion about, and that is the fact that in terms of all of these things that we've been talking to up until now, in terms of bookmarking pages and RSS feeds, those 2 ways of consuming content on the web are the 2 lowest ways that people consume them. In other words, only old guys like us still use bookmarks, right? And forget about RSS feed. Half of our audience, when I said RSS feeds, didn't even know what I was talking about. Most of these people are going to be coming in through social media. They're going to run into you through social media. They're going to hopefully read the entire comic when you put it up on your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed. Then those who are interested are going to come over to your site. And those people predominantly are going to be new readers.
Right.
And that's also, frankly, where ebooks come in, where it would be very easy for you to have links to say you can get chapter 1 for $1. Here's chapter 2 for $1, because that is the way that people are reading webcomics much more frequently than they are just pathing through that archive button.
Really? People are reading ebooks?
Well, maybe not much more, but I think that's increasingly more likely. That's probably the better choice.
I say this completely as mirror research instead of marketing research, but I despise ebooks. I don't know why. To me, the idea of downloading more things onto my iPad when it's already full, I'm like, no, just let me read your damn website. I don't want to go download and pay for an ebook. So that's absolutely being mirror research. But this is a fascinating discussion that I want to check back in on as we both design our new websites, because it's an interesting challenge and one that somewhat has philosophy behind it separate from market research. And what I mean by that is it's more of a subjective call than it is an objective call as to what you should have on landing pages, on on recurring reader pages, etc.
Here's another thing that probably should have been at the top of this conversation, because I can right now hear the voices of 1,000 WordPress developers screaming at me. This also might be, in terms of that primary and secondary landing page, might be something that is easy as setting a cookie on that user's browser, that after the first time they come to the site, they don't go to the landing page anymore. They go directly to the
Sure, and
secondary.
that could be had, but for a lot of people that have more and more advanced ad blockers and cookie blockers, that becomes tricky,
Yeah, well, yeah, that's
because
really
what is it now?
good point.
35% of the web uses ad blockers and advanced cookie blockers and that kind of thing. So anyway, I find it fascinating though from a philosophy of because I legitimately disagree with the way some of our friends and peers have designed their site, but of course I say this from the fact that I haven't redesigned my website in 9 years. So it's not like this is Johnny Hypocrite speaking to the world about what everybody should be doing. But it's also curiosity. I don't know yet how I want to redesign the Drive site, but I know that it is very old and creaky and I need to update it. So it's fun. It's fun to look around and see what people are doing and ask questions about what you're doing wrong. And Lord knows I'm doing a lot wrong. And I do want to check back in on this with you as time goes on.
Well, yeah, this is a really interesting conversation. And again, I'm in the same place. I'll be unveiling a new website hopefully soon, and I'll be able to put my money where my mouth is. And I may find out that once again I was full of shit.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it also can be, again, to the idea that the design philosophies can meet different subjective needs. It could be that you designing for Evil Ink, the way you described it, is absolutely the right way to do it, because for that audience, that works. And it could be that the way that I'm thinking of doing it for Drive is the right way, because subjectively for that story and that audience, it works. So there is that possibility. I think probably the true answer is there is as much as possible a platonic ideal of a webcomic site design, and I would like to try our best to get to that platonic ideal, because I think that would benefit a lot of people.
Particularly for long form, because I think the standard traditional website design that we've got for webcomics works fantastic for strips. If you're doing short form, I don't think that you need to touch that, because it was built for short form. But I think long form creators have to go outside the box.
This is a rare time where we can actually open it up to Hive Mind. So for Patreon backers and for people that use the Discus page for Patreon backers, I would love for the Hive Mind to go into work here and let us know which websites you think are doing long form webcomic website design right, and why, like what specific aspects, even if it's just like, hey, they do this one thing really well, everything else about the website's terrible, but pass that along, because let's try to find the platonic ideal of different bits and pieces that we can cobble together to make the perfect website for long form. That might be a fun project over the next couple months.
Yeah, no, I think that would be great. I know we both check in from time to time. That Discus server can really light up with people, and ideas start flowing really, really quickly. And I've seen some fantastic
I've already bought 2 new Japanese pens based on recommendations from that Discus page. So it's already been useful to me in my own career. So thank you for that. Let's just remind everybody that Drunk Comic Lab can be yours if we get to 100 5-star ratings on iTunes. So Drunk Comic Lab, oh boy, you're going to want to see Brad Guigar drunk. Let me just tell you, that's going to be a treat. And then also, I come by and see me and gauge my sense of how the show is going at Emerald City Comic Con this weekend.
Now you've got new pins for that, don't you?
Oh, I've got a whole host of things, Brad. The new anatomy book is making its debut. New pins, new friendship. That's the most important.
You mentioned we got to talk about this at some point. You just in passing, you said, "Oh my God, Brad, we got to get you doing enamel pins. They are so great," and we never came back to it. But I want to talk about that on the show sometime. Have you walk me through enamel pins?
You know what? I will do enamel pins for my pro tip this week. Let's meet. So if you're a Patreon backer, we'll check out this week's pro tips, because I'm going to talk about why enamel pins are the godsend to webcomic artists, and for all the reasons you can imagine in terms of margins.
So all I have to do is say that you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
I think that's all you have to say. Well, and then I would have to say your hosts have been Brad Guigar, the editor of webcomics.com, and the cartoonist of Evil Ink at evil-comic.com.
And Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com. and Drive at drivecomic.com. Hey, check out the Kickstarter for Dave's new book at newpugbook.com.
And the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net.
ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice, patreon.com/ComicLab.